John Henry Clark, if y'all know who he is, said it best. The oppressed and the oppressor cannot worship the same God. Marinate on that.
Oh, so fabulous.
Hi guys, welcome back to the channel once again. It's your girl Dumebi. If this is your first time coming across my channel, you're welcome. I do hope you decide to subscribe, and if you are a returning subscriber, you guys know that I love you. It's so good to have you here. Welcome back. So you guys, today's video is something that I'm having deja vu at this moment, because I've done something similar and I just have to wonder why this kind of seems to be a thing, where there's a white preacher standing on the pulpit trying to justify slavery and talking about how it probably was God's will, trying to make it look as if it wasn't as bad. You know what? Let me just go right ahead and play this preacher's video.
Were brought over into slavery, which wasn't right, but they got the gospel when they got here. And you know what? I bet you there's a lot of Africans that if they hadn't have been brought over, not saying it was right, don't misunderstand, not justifying the slavery in the situation, but God, I still believe, used it. And now I'm sure there's a lot of Africans that got the gospel, and they're in heaven right now because they got the gospel. You know, what would be better? For them to have lived their entire life in Africa free, doing their voodoo or whatever, and then dying and going to hell, right? Or what happened? And then they go to heaven. They get the opportunity. Now again, it doesn't justify it. The ends do not justify the means, but this is how God works. This is what God does in the Bible. And we have black people in here. I don't think any of you guys were ever slaves. I was never a slave. It's like, white privilege. You were never a slave. You were never living during the time, unless you're very old, like 60 or 70 maybe, or 80 years old, you're never even living during the time where segregation was a thing in this country. I mean, what are you crying about? Nothing even happened to you. You're just making up stuff. You can't look at the facts that I was reading and just attribute that to some kind of white privilege. It's not real. Get over it. Quit having all the excuses. Why don't you take some responsibility for your choices? Be content with whatever situation you were born into and make the most of it. God's not limited to your situation. He can do above, what we ask or think.
Have you guys seen this video? Because, and I think the shocking thing is this was a black church, or maybe a church with black members in the congregation listening to this. Because you could hear when he referenced the black people sitting in the audience listening to him. And at that point, I'm wondering what those black people were thinking, or how they were feeling, or if they were even on board with what he was saying. Because if I was there, I would be livid. And to me, it's the audacity to go and stand in front of a black congregation and say that and think that it's just okay. You know what? Before I talk about what I think, I'm just going to go right ahead and play people's speeches and commentary, because a lot of people definitely responded to that, and you guys can already guess the reaction and the responses.
And make the most of it. God's not limited to your situation. He can do above, what we ask.
So the fact that he has the nerve to say, deal with whatever situation you were born into, I find that absolutely egregious. Okay, for one. For two, he says that God used slavery. I'm going to have to disagree on that. Let's not put God in this. Let's not try to blame this on God. Okay, because if he wants to talk about God, let's go to the fact that in the Bible, when the Pharaoh enslaved the Hebrew Israelites, God told Moses at the burning bush to tell Pharaoh to let his people go. And when Pharaoh did not, God sent the plagues upon them. So please, let's not try to paint false and fictitious narratives as if God enjoyed slavery and in fact used that for the betterment of people. And if he thinks that the Africans brought here, were likely saved through slavery and went to heaven, well, what does he think happened to those nefarious, wicked, low-down slave owners who in fact owned these slaves and mistreated them and did all manner of evil, wicked, and heinous, nefarious, and depraved things to them? That's what I'd like to know. What does he think about them? And then he says there's no such thing as privilege. Well, I'll have to disagree on that as well. And then here's the thing. He says you weren't slaves and he wasn't a slave. Well, I didn't have to be a slave. You see, because here's the thing. Those of my people who look like me, whether we were slaves or not, that's not the problem. You see, the problem is all the things, the atrocities, the race things, the supremacist, and all of these hateful things that happened due to slavery. You see, slavery made people that look like me forever be viewed as inferior to certain other people because our ancestors were in fact slaves. Okay, that also is the reason for black codes, redlining, Jim Crow, which led to segregation and all the other things. Okay, and there's still things that continue until this day, disparagings in sentencing and all sorts of things. Okay, so he knows this, but he wants to sit there and say that we shouldn't complain, like basically saying pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Well, it's pretty hard to pull yourself up by your bootstraps when someone keeps untying the laces. Okay, he needs to make that make sense. At the end of the day, this man is blatantly racist. And every word that he said, I find it quite frankly offensive. He says, deal with whatever situation you were born into. Well, he was likely born into privilege. He was likely born into money. You see, because though we never received any compensation for the enslavement of our ancestors, the slave owners did in fact receive compensation after slavery ended. They got reparations. Okay, they got reparations. And they were allowed to build generational wealth, while people who look like me were not allowed to do so. Okay, let's not forget all of the race riots in this country, and they usually started due to hate. Okay, because of people of my skin tone having their own businesses and all of those things. So there's a whole bunch of things that happened, negatively to impact people of my skin tone due to slavery. And for him to try to bring God into it and act as though that's why God allowed these things to happen, he sounds absolutely insidiously obtuse. Please pay attention. This is all so disgusting that this was said in a church. Okay, and since I live here in Georgia, I think I may just pay a visit to his church and let him know what I really think.
That were brought over into slavery, which wasn't right, but they got the gospel when they got here.
Do you know how nauseating it is to hear white pastors say that slavery was a necessary evil because it brought the gospel to us? Do you know how tired we are as people of color, black folks and indigenous, of hearing this lie? And it is just that, a lie. Here's how I can prove it. If you ever go to the Museum of the Bible, there are two different Bibles. There's the Bible for the white man, and then there was the Bible for the slaves. The Bible for the slaves took out every reference of freedom, in particular, the story of Moses. You see, they didn't want us to know that that wasn't God's plan for us. So now it's been perverted into this, slavery was wrong, but it was a necessary evil to bring the gospel to black folks. Here's why I call bullshit. Why couldn't you just bring the gospel and go back to Europe? Why did you have to enslave my ancestors? Why did you have to colonize my ancestors' homes? Hell, why'd you have to do it here in the United States, quote unquote, such as it is today? Why couldn't you just bring it, be happy that we knew, and left? Because that wasn't the reason for the spread of the gospel. The reason for the spread of the gospel was to be able to take the land grabs. See, we all know about the doctrine of discovery now. So this BS that you're preaching in your churches, we know now that it's a lie. We know that the doctrine of discovery said that you could go over in the name of God and take everybody's land and resources if we weren't Christians. Didn't say anything about converting us to Christianity. It just said if we weren't Christians, you could take our land, our leases, and our people and enslave them for the church. The church has been probably the most problematic for indigenous people around the world because, number one, it gave them permission to mistreat, to steal, to rape, to commit genocide. That's what the church did. And then these white pastors have the nerve and the caucasity to sit and say, well, this was God's will for you so you could learn about him and now you're in heaven. So let me get this straight. You all had to create hell on earth for us to go to heaven? And now you feel so proud of the fact that you brought us the gospel, but you brought us hell first to get us to heaven. Well, you get to live in heaven on earth, and then you get to go to heaven in the afterlife, and we're supposed to buy this. Have the day you deserve.
Africa free, doing their voodoo or whatever, and then dying and going to hell, right?
Number one, that was a great example of being lost in the sauce. Number two, he literally just gave y'all an illustration of the white man burden and how it was used to push a particular perspective when it comes to civilizing us heathens, us Negroes. Number three, y'all know that there are three composing factors to the white man burden. They are Christianity, pragmatism, and manifest destiny, and they proved to be a very propaganda-like cohesive unit that was able to turn foreign policy and convince a lot of people that all you need is to be evangelized and give the burden of building empire on the European settlers and the colonizers and slavers because they can do it better. Number four, this man really said that God used slavery to get the gospel to Africans. Number five, there are places in Africa like Ethiopia that had Christianity before colonizers stumbled across the continent. Number six, he really said that he know that certain Africans would not rather have been free in Africa because they know when they died, they did not go to hell because being free mean they go to hell, but being enslaved mean they go to heaven. And you see where I'm going here with this? Number seven, Christianity was a justification that European powers used to colonize and exploit Africa. Through the dissemination of Christian doctrine in European nations such as Great Britain, France, and the Netherlands sought to educate and reform African culture with a little bit of that sweet baby white Jesus. Amen. My last point. He does realize that there could have been a cultural exchange of the gospel without the exploitation of land or the enslavement. Does he realize that? Like, he ain't got to go there and I ain't saying it's right or wrong, but come on now. Education is elevation and research over me search.
They got the gospel when they got here.
As a descendant of African slaves, I got some voodoo for you. Now your pecker no longer works and you're going to have athlete's foot for the rest of your life.
Check out this video.
I'm sure there's a lot of Africans that were brought over into slavery, which wasn't right, but they got the gospel when they got here.
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man? There's a lot that could be said about this, right? And I've talked about this on my platform on multiple occasions. I talked about it when the Mike Keller video surfaced.
Blacks were slaves. Did they ever go to Washington, D.C. and have a rally 200 years ago to protest against slavery? Here's what the blacks did about 150 years ago. They humbled themselves. They prayed. They sought God's face and they turned from their wicked ways.
I talked about it when the Representative Kimberly Daniels video resurfaced.
I thank God for slavery. And if it wasn't for slavery, I might be somewhere in Africa worshiping a tree.
That's the theology of white supremacy and colonialism. It is the justification that rationalized slavery and genocide from the start of colonialism. It's what the Pope signed off on in the 1400s. Anti-black and anti-indigenous violence and brutality hidden behind the guise of white saviorism, of divine appointment. The idea that God used slavery to bring Africans the gospel. That God used genocide in residential schools to bring indigenous families and their children to Christ. But what those videos get correct, and hear me out, all of these videos get right that West and Central Africans, by and large, would not have been introduced to the Christian faith had it not been for European colonialism and slavery. That is a fact. And what we're seeing now from some black Christians who want to hold on to their faith, and white Christians as well, is this constantly re-emerging narrative that Africans were always Christian. That is the half-truth being told so that people don't really have to sit with the historical reality of colonialism and slavery.
I don't know who told us you got to be a witch to be black. You are not more black by engaging in witchcraft. That is still propagating a white supremacist lie that black people in Africa didn't know Jesus.
The argument that Christianity brought, that colonialism brought Christianity to Africa is completely wrong.
Why is it completely wrong?
Because Christianity was already in Africa before Europe.
But both narratives are rooted in white supremacy and Christian supremacy, which in the American context are indistinguishable. And one narrative is a theological one, meaning that it leans on a theology of suffering that believes that all suffering serves a greater purpose, including slavery. And the other narrative is a pseudo-historical one, meaning that it attempts to distort and misrepresent the history around European colonialism and how it was responsible for the spread of Christianity in West and Central Africa. But both narratives serve white supremacy and Christian supremacy by attempting to demonize and minimize the importance of African traditional religions, which prevailed in West and Central Africa before the dawn of European colonialism. And these narratives are why I stress the importance of decolonizing your spirituality. Because while both of these narratives serve white Christian supremacy, one more obviously so.
What would be better? For them to have lived their entire life in Africa free, doing their voodoo or whatever, and then dying and going to hell, right? Or what happened? And then they go to heaven. They get the opportunity. This is how God works. This is what God does in the Bible.
One masquerades as a pro-black narrative, when at the root it serves white supremacy by attempting to minimize the presence of ATRs in pre-colonial Africa.
I'm angry that they are really trying to convince us that all spiritualism is the same. And we have digested this impurity and this, we want so bad not to be legalistic that we actually become profane.
I'm talking to us now. There is no shame in what our ancestors believed. It is okay to reach back and to remain curious instead of rooting yourself in the misinformation you've been fed about our people and about our history. Love and liberation to you all.
Over the course of my years in life, I have seen, read, and experienced a lot of evil. And in my opinion, one of the most evil things you could ever do to a person is perform your evil and then tell them this is what God wanted.
That if they hadn't been brought over, not saying it was right, don't misunderstand, not justifying the slavery in the situation, but God, I still believe, used it. And now I'm sure there's a lot of Africans that got the gospel and they're in heaven right now.
You gotta be a special kind of fool to listen to this sermon and take this as truth. The man literally said with his mouth, would it have been better for them to have been free and lived their entire life? And then try to demonize that at the end, say voodoo and different stuff. See, that's a white supremacy tactic, but be free and live your entire life, or to live enslaved. And then after you die, after you've worked your entire life to the bone, been beaten, been brutalized, been all type of stuff, then after you did all that stuff, you get to go to heaven. Throughout the entirety of the sermon, he continuously says that he's trying not to justify the institution of slavery. That's a lie. Everything he said was a justification of the institution of slavery. And this is the craziest part about it, which is this is the way that slavery actually was justified from its inception. See, this is the reason I say teach your people, because this same speech that was given in 2023 is the same speech that was given in the 1400s. The Pope said this exact same thing, and it all has the same speech attached to it. Go ahead and do whatever you want. You have the right to promote and force heavily profit from slave trading, and the reason why is because we're doing them a favor. I got a couple of questions for my man here. My question is what would you take, sir, if you were given the option to take your freedom or take the book and the belief system of somebody who unalived your family, kidnapped you, put you in slavery, dehumanized you in every way known to man, made sure that you see yourself and anything associated with your culture as the most nasty, vile thing in the world, also probably SA'd you, and then after that told you it's all going to be better after you pass away? Would you take that over your freedom? Yeah, that's what I thought. Stop playing in my goddamn face.
You know, I personally, being a Christian, when I see videos like this, it makes me question the whole thing. Like, why are we practicing the same religion as people who think like this? I try to tell myself that Christianity itself was not evil, because, Christianity even started in Africa, right? In Ethiopia. So I try to understand and try to hold strong to my belief that Christianity in itself was not evil, but it was the palm-colored people that used it as an excuse to perpetrate evil. It was the palm-colored people that manipulated it and used it as a tool to control and to enslave and to oppress our people. And you know, when I first started getting to know more about Black culture and all the African diaspora people, and I found out that a lot of them were even trying to connect back to our ancestral way of worship and our African spirituality, I was surprised, because I felt that a lot of them would be Christians, just like a lot of us here in Africa. But now that I'm seeing these videos of these preachers coming out to say these preposterous, delusional things on the pulpits, I can now understand why they are inclined to reject Christianity if they have to hear things like this on a daily basis from the mouth of their oppressors. How can you expect people who you have oppressed using a particular religion to still practice the same religion as you? And then you come out and tell them that it was the will of God for them to suffer? So now he keeps putting this disclaimer like, I'm not saying it's right, I'm not saying the end justifies the means, but deep down you're saying, well, you guys should be grateful that we came to save you people from the pits of hell and the voodoo and witchcraft that your ancestors were practicing, because now you guys have the opportunity to go to heaven. The ends don't justify the means, but it was worth it. Now you're not going to burn in the fires of hell. And I'm like, as a Christian, I know the story of Moses and the Israelites and how God saved the Israelites from slavery, and how the Egyptians, who were the oppressors, actually got to face the wrath of God. So is it not the same God that we're talking about here? Moreover, are they trying to say it was God who instructed them to go into Africa and enslave people just so that they could be saved and hear the gospel? if the sole purpose of them going to Africa in the first place was to spread the gospel, did they have to enslave? Did they have to colonize? Did they have to take people's lives and rape people and do all those demonic things that they did? So now, I have one question for him, because he keeps talking about how people in Africa and the black people who they took over to their countries now as slaves, and then their descendants now have a chance to know God and make it to heaven. So the question that I have for this particular man who was on that pulpit talking this rubbish is, so the people, the slave masters and the colonial masters, those evil men that treated people as less than human and took their lives and put them through all forms of torture. Okay, so where are they? Was the God that he's preaching about so impressed that they spread his word and Christianity all across the world that he chose to forgive them for the sins that they committed, which we know in the commandments were against his commandments? There's a commandment that says, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not covet their neighbor's wife and property and all of that. So the colonial masters and the slave masters did all of that. So now you tell me, dear pastor, is your God so impressed by what your colonial masters did that he forgave them for the act of enslaving and colonizing, that he allowed them into heaven? Or maybe there's a different heaven for those that did that, and then there's a different heaven for those that they enslaved and colonized and oppressed. Please let me know, because at this point I believe you're contradicting yourself. And then the way that sermon kind of switched up, and then he started talking about white privilege and how black people in America should be grateful and they are making up things to be angry about. I'm like, wow, this just shows how they think. I think this is why people keep talking about Christian conservatives, straight white men, and how dangerous they are. Now I get it. Because at that point, it was no longer a Christian sermon. It became a political speech, in my opinion. So now you're telling them to be grateful for the life that they have and make the best of it. It sounds like the speech a slave master would give his slaves. You should be grateful you're here. Be grateful for whatever treatment you're getting. At least you're alive. Be grateful for whatever treatment you're getting. At least you're no longer in Africa with your poverty-stricken relatives. We have brought you to our beautiful country. That is what it sounds like to me. So they should be so grateful and content with the new life that they have no right to speak up for the injustices that they are facing. And of course, it doesn't even acknowledge that they are facing any form of injustices. This is just crazy, you guys. This is so similar to this other video. You guys check that video out if you have not seen it. It is crazy at this point. And I'm wondering, when they give sermons like this, like, how does it end? Do they just give these sermons and everybody is quiet and watching them and maybe applauding them, and then they just stand up and walk out of the church freely? Like, nobody contests what they say. Nobody asks them any question. Nobody debates them. Like, how does it work? I would really love to see how this ends for them, because I don't understand. Anyway, you guys let me know what you think in the comment section. Please don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye.